Hey everyone, welcome. We're about to jump into one of the most, chaotic and game-changing periods in all of British history, the era of the Tudors and Stuarts. And trust me, this is way more than just a story about kings and queens. We're talking about a nation literally at war with itself, over faith, over power, over its very identity. And the crazy thing is, these fights didn't just change who wore the crown, they actually built the foundations of the Britain we know today. So yeah, if you're studying for the Life in the UK test, this is absolutely need-to-know stuff.
So to kind of see where we're going, let's get our bearings with this timeline. It's basically our roadmap for over 200 years of some serious drama. We're starting in 1485 when the Tudors first show up, and we're ending in 1688 with a revolution that completely flipped the script on who actually runs the country. Here's the game plan. We're going to break it all down into 5 chunks. We'll kick things off with the Tudors and the Reformation, then check out the religious mess that came next. After that, we'll see what was happening in Scotland and Ireland, then dive into the epic showdown between the king and Parliament, and wrap it all up with the glorious Revolution. All right, let's get right into it with our first section, the Tudors. Now, the story really gets going with Henry VII, the guy who cleaned up the mess from the Wars of the Roses and made the monarchy strong again. But it was his son, the famous Henry VIII, who was about to light a fuse that would change everything. And what's so wild about this is that the English Reformation didn't kick off because of some big religious idea. Nope, it started with a very personal, very political problem. Henry VIII was desperate for a son, the Pope said no way to a divorce, so Henry basically said, fine, I'll start my own church and I'll be the boss. Incredible, right? Now, it's really important to remember, Henry's big move wasn't happening in a bubble. A huge storm was already sweeping across Europe called the Reformation. All over the continent, people were challenging the Pope's power, pushing for a more personal kind of faith, and demanding to read the Bible in their own language, not in Latin. So Henry VIII creates this new church, but here's the question. What does it actually believe? Well, as soon as he dies, a massive religious roller coaster gets started. His 3 kids all end up on the throne, and each one has a completely different idea, which throws England into decades of total chaos. First in line was his young son, Edward VI. He was a really devout Protestant, and for him, just breaking away from the Pope wasn't nearly enough. He wanted to change the very heart of the church's beliefs and rituals to make England a truly Protestant country. And how did he pull this off? Well, he had a secret weapon, and it was revolutionary, the Book of Common Prayer. For the very first time, this one book set out how every single church service should be done. And it was all in English. This was a massive deal. It completely changed how regular people experienced their faith. But Edward didn't live very long. And next up was his older sister, Mary I, a staunch Catholic who was dead set on undoing everything her brother did. The pendulum just swung violently in the other direction. She brought back the Pope's authority and started this really brutal crackdown on Protestants, which is how she got that famous nickname, Bloody Mary. I mean, just look at this. It really shows you the dizzying whiplash the whole country was feeling. Just imagine you're a normal person going to church. One day, everything's in English. The next, it's back to Latin you can't understand. The rules for being a good Christian were completely turned upside down, and then back again. Okay, so after all that chaos, in comes Elizabeth I to try and clean up the mess, and her solution was pure genius. It was called the Middle Way. She made England Protestant again, but in a really smart, moderate way that was designed to just calm everyone down. And it worked. Her super long and successful reign, especially after that famous defeat of the Spanish Armada, really cemented this new religious identity for England. Now, while all of this drama is unfolding in England, you gotta remember, England isn't the only country on the island. We need to zoom out a bit, because its neighbors, Scotland and Ireland, were going down totally different roads, and the choices made there would spark conflicts that would last for centuries. See, in Scotland, the Reformation was much more of a grassroots movement, and it created a really passionate Presbyterian church. And here's the crucial difference. The Scottish church was run by its own elders, not by bishops chosen by the king. They were fiercely independent, and that little fact is going to be a huge deal later on. And this whole religious split was perfectly summed up by the intense rivalry between 2 super powerful women, the Protestant Queen Elizabeth of England and her Catholic cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary was this huge symbol for anyone who wanted to bring Catholicism back to England, and eventually, after being locked up for years, she was executed for getting tangled up in plots against Elizabeth. Meanwhile, in Ireland, things were different yet again. and frankly much darker. The English crown decided to tie religion to colonization through a policy they called plantations. This meant they took huge amounts of land from the native Catholic Irish and just gave it to Protestant settlers from England and Scotland. This wasn't just about land. It planted the seeds of bitter conflict that would define that region's history for hundreds of years. Okay, so this is where the story takes a huge turn. When Queen Elizabeth I dies without any kids, her cousin, who happens to be the King of Scotland, takes over the English throne. This kicks off the Stuart dynasty, and with the Stuarts, the main fight in the kingdom changes. It's less about religion now and more about a raw power struggle. The big question becomes, who's really the boss, the king or Parliament? The Stuart kings, James I and his son Charles I, brought this idea with them from Scotland that was, well, pretty explosive. It's called the divine right of kings. They truly, honestly believed that God had put them on the throne, and so they only had to answer to God. As for Parliament, its job was to do what it was told, not to argue back. And you can probably guess what happened next. These two ideas just couldn't exist in the same country. It all blew up into the English Civil War. It was brutal, and it led to something that was just unthinkable at the time. Parliament won, they put the king on trial, and they executed him for treason. For about a decade, England was actually a republic, run by a military leader named Oliver Cromwell. But the whole republic thing, it didn't stick. The monarchy eventually came back with Charles II, in an era we call the Restoration. And this was a time of just incredible drama. London got hit by the Great Plague, then the Great Fire burned a huge chunk of the city down. But out of all that destruction, a new city was born, with amazing buildings like St. Paul's Cathedral rising from the ashes. And out of all this mess comes something incredibly important, a law called the Habeas Corpus Act. This is a massive deal, a cornerstone of freedom as we know it. It's the law that says the government can't just lock you up and throw away the key. They have to bring you to court and prove they have a reason to hold you. It's a fundamental right that protects us to this very day. All right, that brings us to our last section, the grand finale, really. This is the moment that finally settles that long fight between the Crown and Parliament. And the best part? They managed to do it without another huge bloody war. So after everything, the break with the Pope, all the religious fighting, a civil war, executing a king, one massive question was still just hanging there in the air. Who gets the final say? Is it the monarch, or is it the people's representatives in Parliament? The answer came in 1688, and it was a real plot twist. The king, James II, was Catholic, and when he had a son, Parliament completely freaked out, terrified of a permanent Catholic dynasty. So they did something incredibly bold. They secretly invited a foreign Protestant ruler, William of Orange, to come over with an army and take the throne. James II fled, and power changed hands with almost no fighting. They called it the Glorious Revolution. And that right there, that is the big takeaway from this whole era. Think about it. By inviting a new king to rule, Parliament sent a crystal clear message about who was now in charge. The idea of the divine right of kings was officially dead. From now on, monarchs would rule with the permission of Parliament, not without it. The foundation for the modern UK and its constitutional monarchy was finally, after all that conflict, set in stone.